Stay tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. Joan served the state of California as a member on the Arts Council and on the Film Commission. She was formerly on the Architectural Commission and fulfilled 2 terms on the Fine Arts Commission for the city of Beverly Hills. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, Condé Nast Publications, and the Hearst Corporation, Joan covered the world of fashion, the mysteries of food, the excitement of theater, and the international art scene. She continues to find people who are on the cutting edge of their professions. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. We're taping here at the Hollywood Museum on Highland Avenue. And our guests are author Barbara Isenberg and Sarri Gilman, a family therapist and community leader. Chicago-born Barbara Isenberg attended high school in Phoenix, graduated from UC Berkeley, and has gone on to become an award-winning journalist and author. Barbara was the chief arts writer at the LA Times when she went on to contribute to other freelance newspapers, right? When you were still there, were you able to freelance with other newspapers?
I was.
And were you able to write your novels at that time as well?
No, I didn't start writing books until after I left the Times.
That's what I wondered. So your first big thing was Diary of a Broadway musical.
Yeah, it was called Making It Big, the Diary of a Broadway Musical.
So tell me what that was about, because I want to go through some of these books that you've written, State of the Arts, and different books until we get to tradition.
Okay, it's a short journey.
Oh, no, not very short.
There are 4 books.
So Diary?
The first one was the Broadway musical Big, which was based on the film with Tom Hanks.
Oh, that's what it was.
The enormously successful film.
I got it, okay.
Was being turned into a musical by a great team. It was Maltby and Shire, the composing team. It was Mike Ockrent, the director. Susan Stroman was the choreographer. John Weidman was the book writer. Paul Gimignani, who always works with Stephen Sondheim, was the conductor. And Robin Wagner was the set designer. And I knew most of these people, and I thought, you know, it's time to do a book. Maybe I could tag along with them.
Did you know them because you were writing about the arts at that time?
Yes.
Had you written about them?
I had written about most of those people, yes.
I see. Yeah.
I had written articles on Stroman, Weidman, on almost all of them.
Yeah, right.
So they all kind of knew me. And I was thinking about leaving the LA Times, and I thought, if I have a book project, this would be a good time.
Oh, I see.
So they auditioned me to make sure they wanted to have someone tag along. And then after I passed the audition, I was with them from their auditions all the way through to when they closed on Broadway.
You did a lot of tagging along on a lot of your books, right?
That's right.
So the next one was State of the Arts, and it was about all kinds of artists in California.
Right. It began when the Los Angeles County Museum of Art was going to have an exhibition on historic California and the arts. And so as you went through the exhibition, you would be able to, like, push in number 17 or whatever and hear me talking to David Hockney or Ed Ruscha or whoever, the many artists I interviewed. But then I used it broadly. I thought you can't write a book about California unless you include Joan Didion, unless you include Randy Newman.
I was going to say you had musicians, writers, authors.
Right. Robbie Bates. Dancers, Bella Lewitsky.
I know, that was so great to see her name again pop up when I was talking about you or reading about you.
Yeah, there was...
so then you went and interviewed them separately and brought them into the book?
Well, I had 50 chapters about how California affects creativity. So the first chapter was Bella Lewitsky. The last chapter was Clint Eastwood.
Oh,
and
so
then
it was the
it
gamut.
was everybody. Yeah, there were 50 of them. And I only stopped because I ran out of time, or there would have been 100 of them.
That's fantastic. And then conversations with Frank Gehry, because I remember when you were saying, I was just with Frank, or I just did this with Frank.
Well, as it happened, like 4 of the people that I interviewed for the California book I talked with them further. They all were kind of interested in doing other projects. And so Frank Gehry asked me if I wanted to just chat with him. He was getting older. He was thinking about an oral history. He was thinking about his legacy. And so we started chatting, and I thought, this is really a book.
And he was able to do that with you. He wanted to chat with you.
Yeah, he asked me. And then...
that was 2009 that it was
well,
published?
It was published in 2009. Yeah, we spent 3 years on it. Oh. And then Knopf published it in 2009.
Did you spend that much time on the other books? 3 years?
I always, well, Making It Big had a time limit because it was going to open on Broadway. So that one I did all the time, day and night, for like a year and a half. And then the other books were...
The artist book had to take time too, because it was at the museum.
That's right. It had to be timed to the museum. So the Gehry book didn't have that time pressure. But, you know, Frank is a busy guy.
Did you travel with him?
I did not.
You didn't travel. You didn't follow him
around the world.
Yeah, around the world. I mean,
know.
all the time. He was always gone, or still is always gone.
Well, he was gone less. We did most of the interviewing on weekends or around the holidays when I knew he'd be in town.
Did you use a tape recorder?
Yes.
And
now the other thing is, when I was at the LA Times, I had written about Frank Gehry a lot. And I had actually followed the development of Disney Hall for a year, on and off. So I had a lot on that.
You had a lot of material?
Right. And I had, from that period, I had not just the stuff about Disney Hall, but I had a lot about Frank. So that when I went in, I already had a little bit of a base.
So then, how did we get to tradition?
Good question. I always like to do something.
From Frank to tradition. Well, actually, that's a Jewish tradition. Frank is very strongly Jewish.
Right. Well, it's also, I like to kind of do different things. And I knew that it was the 50th anniversary of Fiddler on the Roof.
Right.
And about 10 years ago, I had done an article for the LA Times. I was assigned an article on Fiddler on the Roof. And it was a lot of fun. And it was a very kind of meaningful experience. All of the people involved were smart, articulate, interesting. It was a play about something. And so when I finished the Gehry book, you know, I'd always kind of wanted to go back to Fiddler. I thought it would be a good time.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. And also it was the 50th anniversary
of
Fiddler.
Two of those, the anniversary things come out, which is great.
Yeah. So it was timed well.
When you came out of Berkeley, were you going to be an author or were you going to be a journalist? I mean, what were you deciding to do?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer. And so I've been a journalist since I finished college.
So did you? Where was your first job?
Well, I worked a few places for very short times, and then it was the Wall Street Journal.
It was. That was your big break?
And the Wall Street Journal, I was a financial reporter. But we also got to write those front page features.
Oh,
and so after about a year of it, I thought, you know, I'm really interested in the arts. And so I dabbled a little, but not much.
So that became your major focus, the arts.
As I finished. When I got to the LA Times, where I went after the Journal, I made it my focus, yes.
So that's how these books are focused. They're really focused on the arts.
Well, they are. I mean, I've been writing for other people, too. I mean, I wrote about the arts for Esquire.
Oh, you mean other publications?
Yes, for other publications.
I think your whole career has been like that, the arts-oriented writer.
The last
Huffington
30
Post,
years,
right?
And then I've done catalogs about I did a history of the Pantages Theater.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Do you do critiques for artists as well?
No,
no.
I'm not
See,
a critic.
That's where the difference is.
Yeah, I don't have opinions. You know, my whole life I've been always trying to balance. If I tell you A, I'm going to say on the other hand B. And that's how critics do.
That's really interesting because everyone thinks that if you're a writer and you know about the arts, you can be critical as well. But I don't think it does work.
I can be informed.
Right.
You know, I'm very informed. But I don't, you know, and sometimes I'll toss in the word excellent or something. But I don't usually toss in the word dreadful, you know. I mean, and I prefer interviewing. So almost...
That's the point, I think.
And all of my books really focus on interviews.
And you focused on the creators of Fiddler on the Roof.
Right.
Those creators were very crazy about Chagall, the painter.
Right.
So how did that all come about?
Well, the way Fiddler started is it's based on short stories that were written by Sholem Aleichem.
Right.
100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. And Sheldon Harnick, the lyricist, and Jerry Bach, the composer, had worked together on various projects, and a friend dropped off a copy of Sholem Aleichem's novel, Wandering Stars, and said, "It's a great musical. So this is your next project." Harnick reads the book, and he says, "This is fabulous." Sends it to his partner, the composer.
And they'd all work together, right?
Yeah.
They all worked together.
Well, the composer said it was great, but when they took it to their book writer, Joseph Stein, he didn't think it was too good at all for a musical. But when he was a little boy, his father, who'd come from Poland, would read to him the original stories of Tevye the Dairyman in Yiddish.
Oh.
And he thought that would make a musical.
Oh, so he shifted it.
He shifted it.
Because those stories included Tevye, didn't they?
Well, the
Sholem Aleichem stories?
Well, yes. The first one was a novel, and it was of a traveling theater troupe, and it had too many tangents and stuff. But the Tevye stories were rich. They were very rich.
And they were old traditional stories, weren't they?
Well, they were stories about... Sholem Aleichem created a village, Anatevka,
Right. Yeah.
and then he put in Anatevka a dairyman, Tevye, who runs around and talks to God and says
Has 5
interesting
daughters.
things. 5 daughters
5
to marry
daughters,
off.
right.
Yeah, there were actually 7 daughters in the stories, but 2 of their stories were so depressing that the creators of the musical left them out.
But this is interesting because you think that a musical just comes out, right?
Well,
Somebody's writing it and the story's right there and you just go.
Well, I mean, not at this point in my life. I don't think that anymore.
And but
Yeah.
how many Tonys did it get and how long was it on Broadway?
It was on Broadway for almost 8 years, and it won, I think, I can't remember the number right now, 8 or 9 Tonys. But what's interesting is that it didn't just happen. You know, they wrote something, and then it wasn't good. I'll give you an example. I don't know how familiar you are with Fiddler, but the first song is Tradition,
Right.
which is one of the most popular songs ever.
Right. Opens, starts you on a high.
Right, but that's not how it originally began. It originally began with a song called We've Never Missed a Sabbath Yet. And it was a scene in a kitchen with the mother and the daughters chopping bread, baking cookies, doing, stuff like that. But when Jerome Robbins came in,
Oh, right.
Jerome Robbins, he wanted something a lot bigger. So Robbins every day would meet with them, and he'd say, "What's this show about?" And they'd all say, "It's about this dairyman and his 5 daughters." And Jerome Robbins would say, no, if that's it, it's not anything we could ever use. It's no one will be interested. That's just another...
So it just went on for how long like this?
This went on for like a year.
Oh, just back and forth.
Back and forth. And the way musicals come about, is they rewrite.
Rewrite.
You write and then you rewrite.
I know when I was reading, you was like, these songs are not in it. Those songs are not in it. This storyline has changed. And it's amazing because once they got it on Broadway and it won all of its Tonys, it went to film, right?
Well, it went to film. The film actually opened while it was still on Broadway.
It did.
Because it was on Broadway for almost 8 years.
Oh.
And the filmmakers wanted to do it earlier, but they contractually didn't work that way.
I see.
But in this case, Joseph Stein, the book writer, wrote 5 drafts. The songwriting team wrote 30 songs, of which they used a third.
Amazing, isn't it?
It is.
It's amazing.
Well, just think if you had let's say you were doing this show and you did 55 hours, and then they took 1 hour and they said, let's just start over.
Well, it's like a painting. You
Right.
give them 50 paintings and they go, oh, we only want these 2.
Right.
For this show. I love the book.
Oh, thank
I
you.
read it so fast and from cover to cover, and I'm so glad you came to talk about it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I wanted your whole body of work to be known today. So Barbara Isenberg, thank you very much.
The pleasure.
And don't go away. We'll be right back with Sarri Gilman. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. We're here at the Hollywood Museum, taping in the historic Max Factor building. And our guest, who was born and raised in Long Island, New York, is author, community leader, marriage and family therapist, Sarri Gilman. She's got a bachelor's degree from George Washington University and a master's from the Phillips Institute. Sarri holds workshops and is in private practice on Whidbey Island, Washington State. What is a family therapist, and how long have you been doing it?
Oh, I love that. What is a family therapist? A family therapist is somebody who works with individuals or couples or whole families and even multiple generations.
Oh, is that right? Multiple
family
generations?
Issues. Well, I've
what
been
are
in
the
practice
issues?
long enough to have now worked with multiple generations
That's
in a
great.
family.
And when you work through that, what are the issues are the same, or do they change as they get older and change age?
Issues definitely change. One of the things that I've learned from my clients is that as we age, we look back at our life entirely differently. We see every story differently, right? Are you experiencing that?
I'm there now, and my daughter
Right.
was saying the other day, "Oh, look at them," and I went, "Isn't it nice?" Where I would have said the same thing she did at her age.
That's it. Everything looks different, and I have learned that from people, and I love that. And so our perspective changes what we think of the stories that we've lived through.
And we're changing because we're getting more mellow?
Hopefully. Because people that don't reach that part, Joan, they're really missing it.
Well, tell me what one issue would be that you deal with.
I often deal with boundaries. That's why I wrote all about it.
That's
because
your
I
book.
feel like every issue eventually comes back to that issue.
And what is a boundary?
A boundary is how we say yes and no, but the deeper meaning of a boundary is it's how we take care of ourselves. It's really self-care. That's the job of our boundary, and so that affects everything.
But does somebody come to you and say, my daughter isn't taking care of everything, or she's not doing it the right way? I don't think boundaries is a common word. My daughter used it this morning with her father. She said, I didn't know what the boundaries were. But maybe that's becoming
You're right. It's not a common. No,
Yeah.
it is not a common word. It was. It's not even a common concept, and so
that's right.
That's why I wrote the book, was because it is so uncommon. But really, once you start paying attention to it and you put your awareness on it, you notice that it is affecting everything, because our boundaries affect every single decision. Anytime you make a decision, you're using your boundaries.
Like, should I say yes or should I say no?
That's right. Anytime you're making a decision about anything, anytime you're in a relationship with any other human being, you're using your boundary around how that relationship, how close they are, how far they are, how you're going to manage situations with them. And it affects, so it's every decision, it's every relationship, and it's your entire life long. We never outgrow the need to use these skills.
So have you always been talking about boundaries since you've been a therapist?
I love that question, because the truth is, it's what my clients are always talking about.
Oh, they're
and
right.
So
But I mean,
it's what they come in and they decide what they're going to talk
because
about.
the reason I'm asking is you founded something called Cocoon House.
Yes.
And did that come out of boundaries?
Did that involve boundaries? All of my work.
What was that?
Cocoon House is, well, it still is. It's a teen shelter and teen housing program in Everett, Washington. It has several locations in Washington State, and it's there to serve and get kids off the street, basically, and help them turn their lives around. And the idea of turning your life around and figuring out how to have a positive relationship with people around you, how to build your own dreams and goals, that, to me, all comes from that place inside of us of what's a yes for me and what's a no for me. And so even with those teens, they had to figure out, what's a yes for me? What really is what I want to do next? Is school, finishing school, a yes for me? Are drugs a yes for me? What's a no for me? Is sex a yes for me? Is it a no for me? Is having kids at age 14 a yes for me or a no for me? You know, that I found them having to make decisions at a very young age that were way beyond what they could manage. And so, yes, boundary work comes up at all ages. It comes up in all stages of our life. And I found that all of my work with people, no matter where I worked and no matter who I work with, eventually people bring up questions that are core to how do I take care of myself, what's a yes for me and what's a no.
It all comes back to yourself. It's what it sounds like. It's all coming back to me or to your client.
If you can get aware of that, if you pay attention to that and notice that, you'll realize that that's where a lot of your wisdom is. It's inside of you and a lot of your strength and your gift. And if people can tap into that, you know, before they get older, they can really feel like they're in charge of their lives.
That Paul Williams and Tracy Jackson wrote a book about gratitude and trust. And one of the affirmations is, if something's wrong, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the one that made it wrong. And that's back to what you're saying. Is it, how am I taking care of myself? Or what am I doing that's yes or no?
Yeah, we have a lot more influence over our happiness and our world around us than we really recognize. And we think often that things are happening to us. And there are things that are happening around us. But we're also a player in that.
Like being the victim all the time.
Yeah, and we have great capacity to make our lives better. We have great capacity to make the whole planet better. When I think about the impact of boundaries on global issues, it's huge. I mean, this is what we fight wars over.
So your workshops, I'm jumping from Cocoon House because that was one example of what transforming your boundaries encompasses. But your workshops also teach you how to define boundaries.
Yes, absolutely.
And how do you find the people in your workshops? Where do they come from?
I love that. You know, the workshops became my way of just opening up the doors to this conversation with whoever wants to come to the workshop and focus on this
How
work.
do we know where to find Sarri Gilman in her workship?
I have a website,
Okay.
transformyourboundaries.com, and it's also under my name. And I list current workshops where anybody could attend.
So are they all over the city, all over the state, all over California?
I've done them in all different places, and then they're also hired privately by companies or people who want to have a get-together with a small group of people and bring together 10 people or 20 people or 30 people, and I'll do the workshop there.
I wondered about that. Would they be like
Privately.
Corporations? Would companies call you?
And organizations, and then I go in and work with the staff, and the focus is on, it's the same, the workshop is 3 hours, and my goal is to equip everybody in the room in 3 hours with everything they need, all the tools that they will need with their boundaries for the rest of their life.
Do they use
That's
the
my
card?
goal in 3 hours.
Do they
and
use the card deck?
They do use the card
And
deck.
I remember being in it. You pair people up.
Yes.
And people who don't even know each other. So
and everybody gets to share stories, right?
Yes,
Did you experience that? It's all storytelling because we all have experience
but
with
what
our
if
boundaries.
it's in a corporation? They all know each other. Do you still pair them up like that?
I do pair them up, and I give them scenarios, just like I gave you scenarios, and they get to share. And then usually what happens in even though every workshop is different, what's different is the kinds of stories people tell, but the experience of sharing is open for everybody, and usually everybody jumps in. People can't wait to tell their stories.
I was surprised. People do like to talk about themselves. The other thing is giving advice, because you ask for advice from the people in the group.
To each other.
Yeah, each other.
Because we all have experience with this, right? And so in some ways people have more expertise than they realize. And when they leave the workshop, what they get to see is from 10 or 20 or 30 people, you see a whole continuum of oh, I don't have those skills, but I have those skills. I know how to handle that situation. I wouldn't know how to handle this situation. And you learn it all at once because it's like you see everything in the room. No matter how, if I gather any 10 or 20 people,
you still do.
I'm going to see the range of boundary issues in the room, and that's what we're looking at.
So one of the parts of this book are the types of people. Workaholic.
The patterns, yes.
Yes, the patterns.
Of people.
I think those are great because when you have seven patterns.
That's
so
what I've seen.
You have workaholics.
That's me.
Me too. And you have caretakers.
Well, that's been me also.
My daughter.
Yeah, that's been me also.
Lovers. Me.
Yeah. Done that one.
Protectors. Yes. But can we be all of these? What was the other one? Isolator.
The isolator.
You have to be by yourself?
The isolator ends up isolating and pulling back and feeling lonely. These are people that are always saying, I am so lonely. And they have isolated themselves to the point where nobody can get in because the walls are too high. It's almost like the boundaries are too rigid.
Oh, and the sacrificer?
The sacrificer. And
is she always doing something like for someone else, or is she feeling sorry for herself and saying, I'm making this sacrifice?
They're always doing for others, but they do it because they believe they're supposed to, because that's their purpose for living. And so it's very hard for them to undo that, because it's not just that they're willing to sacrifice, but they believe that that's an important thing that they're supposed to do. And so we have to relearn that there's more to life than sacrificing yourself for everybody around you, and that sometimes those sacrifices kind of have no purpose.
But what about the number?
Oh, the number. We
What
have
does
a
the
lot
number
of
do?
numbers. We have a lot of numbers. Numbers take a lot of drugs and alcohol. So
Oh, they numb themselves?
They numb themselves.
I see.
They medicate or they shop. They often have the credit card bills to go with the numbing.
Oh, so that's like an addiction too.
It could
a number.
also be, it could also be those people who spend all of their time online.
Is numbing themselves?
Numbing themselves out. They're not kind of in the world with anybody anymore. They're numbing out. And it is very common in our culture to have numbing. And so oftentimes there are people that are even in recovery from some of the numbing behavior.
Okay, so we talked about things that we really like: isolator, sacrificer, number, protector. That's kind of self-explanatory, no?
Yes.
Somebody who's protecting
and often lying about some of the issues in their life because they're so busy protecting.
That's why I brought it up, because you always have something behind it, like the workaholic. I mean, you just called yourself one, and I call myself one.
Oh, I am.
What's behind us?
It's like a freight train, right? What's behind us? Yes, it's what's pushing us is that feeling of, wanting to be, well, for me, what pushes me is not wanting to disappoint and always having this thing of excellence, right?
Interesting.
Which can turn into almost perfectionism. Like
not disappoint. That's a big part.
Yeah, and so when I set a boundary for my work in the world, when I'm setting boundaries, first of all, I sweat. Because setting boundaries does involve sweating. And if you're not sweating, then you're actually probably not doing the hard part of the boundary work that you have to do. So we sweat. And when I'm about to set a boundary and I'm saying to somebody that, the answer is going to be no, what I always start with is, you're going to be disappointed. And that helps me. Because then I'm like, whew, I don't have to hear how disappointed they are because I've just said it.
You told them.
Yes,
and
so you have to think of your line of what drives you and then say it.
I think we have to continue reading this book because I've learned so much from you, and I'm so glad you came. You're going back to Washington. I'm glad you were in California today. And thank you, Sarri Gilman, so much.
Thank you for having me.
Keep writing, JAQUINN1 at AOL.com.